This is a Dr. Bill Corter, and I have one question for today's presentation. Is parenting becoming more difficult? And I think for most of us, we view parenting as timeless. Each generation has different challenges, but in many ways they're the same challenges. My viewpoint is a little bit different. I think today's millennial parents have a much more difficult challenge to raise their children than probably at any time in history. And to put it in context, we have in the United States around 22 million millennial parents, and we currently have about 9,000 babies born daily. So it's a sizable group of individuals who are now trying to raise their children. Now, why do I think it's more difficult? Three primary reasons. One is toxicity, two is competition, and three is the complexity, not just of the world, but complexity to get advice on how to improve your parenting. So let me go over all three items and give you my opinions. Number one, I think we all have to realize toxicity. The food that I ate when I was growing up is different than the food today. The air that I breathed when I was growing up is different than it is today. Even the water that I drank is far different than the water that the kids are drinking today. So today, we have 77,000 new chemicals. We have GMOs. We have contaminants in our food supply. We have toxins in the world, in the air, in the water. We have toxins in makeup, in deodorants, etc. We're surrounded by chemicals, and they all impact our children and their development. You look at the babies today, newborn. They have over 100 chemicals in the umbilical cord. You do studies of young children or adolescents. The great majority of them have GMOs in their bloodstream. GMOs are genetically modified organisms from food. All of them, I think, have toxic effects. Therefore, for today's kids growing up, there's an exponential increase in terms of ADHD, in terms of autistic spectrum disorder, in terms of developmental disorders, in terms of learning difficulties. The classroom today is markedly different than the classroom when I was growing up. And the home today and the behaviors that a parent has to manage today are far more difficult and problematic than when I was growing up. So I think the millennium parents, because of toxicity, have a huge challenge. The second component is competition. I grew up private. When I was born, it was probably 2-3 weeks before my parents took a couple photographs of me and shared them with the neighborhood. My early years in my development was private. Today, with the millennium parents, the majority of parents have a picture of their baby up on the internet for the entire world to see before they're even born. And by day one, there's a whole slew of pictures up on the internet. So the kids are no longer raised in private, they're raised in public. And that goes through their entire life. Now, all of us are aware of how difficult the best colleges are to get into. Today, their acceptance rates are worse than they've ever been in history. It's harder and harder to get into the top colleges. Well, that competition is not true just for the colleges. I think it's all the way through life. Because everything your child does today, it's on Facebook, it's on Instagram. And any parent is going to be exposed to positive feedback, but also negative feedback. I think in my generation, the negative feedback was much, much less. Today, it's much higher. So I think with toxicity and competition, it's tough for today's millennial parents. The third part is the complexity of getting advice. I was part of the baby boomer population. Those are people that were born between 1946 and 1964. When I was raised, the primary resource was Dr. Benjamin Spock and his baby and child care books and his subsequent children books. They were in every single American household. And what they did is they offered a fundamental approach, be affectionate, be loving, be supportive, don't be critical. but they offered specific recommendations as a pediatrician, which is what Dr. Spock was, on development. If your child had difficulty sleeping, if your child had difficulty developing relationships, if your child had a difficult transition to school or did poorly in school, Dr. Benjamin Spock had specific recommendations. What happens today? Well, the number one resource for all millennium parents is Google. Well, we've all been to Google. You do a search for something, and what do you get? You get 100 different sites and dozens of different opinions. It's hard to find a consensus. And so I think today's parents face the toxicity, the competition, and then confusion on what to do and what's best to do as a parent. And so I want to offer one refrain, and it's the same refrain that Dr. Benjamin Spock basically used to offer again and again and again. And it's his recommendation that parents typically know far more than what they think they know. And that's my advice to millennium parents. That's my advice to the increasing challenge. Trust yourself. Trust that you know more than you think you know. So my recommendation is to, follow what's in your heart, follow the pathway that you've chosen, but be consistent. And in that consistency, give love and affection and support, but try to do it more in private than just public. Try to do it with less competition as opposed to more competition. And last but not least, I want to emphasize that today's statistics show that the average parent spends less than 20 minutes a day one-on-one with their child. You need to avoid that statistic. All of those components are important, but time is priceless. Spend more time with your child, not less time. Give them more affection and support, and follow your instincts. And I think as a millennium parent, yes, it's harder, but I think you'll do just fine. Thank you for listening. If this topic resonated with you at all, please listen to the next 3 or 4 videos, as they're all going to address different components and different stages of parenting in the hope that we can protect our children from the chaos, violence, and toxicity of the world. Thank you.